Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, presented to you by Mumbrella Bespoke in partnership with Resolution Digital. For those of you that don't know, we are a full-service digital agency specialising in e-commerce. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the many lands on which we're joining from, which for us is the land of the Cadigal tribe of the Eora people. My name is Georgie, and I'm so pleased to be moderating today's session. We'll be deep diving into ways to use data, technology, and really work to double online retail sales in just 9 months. Currently just after 2 p.m. and we have 1 hour. I promise we'll have you back to work promptly at the top of that hour. Now, it may come as no surprise to anyone here that the last 2 years have changed consumer behaviours dramatically. Online retail growth has been at a record high thanks to ongoing uncertainty around COVID-19. This in turn has led many brands and retailers to pivot their business focus towards e-commerce to really help stay competitive. Now, the e-commerce boom isn't limited to your typical retail verticals either. We're seeing massive strides being made in industries like automotive, who are really looking to take advantage of the growth in consumers who are primed and ready to make that purchase online. Many retailers face challenges to keep up with this changing consumer demand. The lack of online visual merchandising and clarity on team responsibilities, coupled with the lack of resource to rejuvenate online presence, are why many retailers struggle to maintain their competitive edge in the online retail space. Today, we'll hear from our panel of experts who will discuss how to face these challenges head-on, using key tools and technology to help brands double their e-commerce sales. And with that, I'd like to introduce today's speakers. First up, we have Mo, Chief Product Officer at Resolution Digital. We also have Gavin, joining us as Head of Experience and E-commerce at Resolution Digital. And now, just for some housekeeping, we encourage all of you joining us from home, or if you've made it into the office, to get involved in today's session as much as possible. Thank you to everyone who has already submitted a question for our panel, but don't worry if you haven't already, there is still time. On the right-hand side of your window, you'll see the Q&A tab. Enter your questions here to the panel, and at the end of the webinar, we'll try and get through as many of these questions as possible. There's also a chat function for any discussions you may want to have with your fellow viewers, or to feedback on any of the content you see presented. And with that, over to Gav, who will kick things off.
Kindly, George. So I'll quickly run through our agenda for today. First of all, I'll take you through the e-commerce landscape, after which I'll pass on to Mo, who's going to talk through core success, talk through some observations on team structure, as well as data-driven strategy. After that, I'll take you through a more granular approach to share of shelf optimization. We'll jump back to Mo, who'll talk to us about retail media, and after which we'll really wrap that up to show you how the results manifest. So jumping straight in, there's going to be a lot of stats here that I'm sure most of you in the audience are more than familiar with. However, 5.5 million households shopping online in Australia last year, which approximately amounts to about 56% of all Australian households. In 2020, 1.35 million of all Australian households shopped online for the very first time. So we're seeing all of this accelerated e-commerce growth driven by COVID. 4 in 5 households actually bought something online in 2020. And Black Friday and Cyber Weekend continued to grow significantly year on year. So we did see a 6% increase between 2021 and 2022. And actually, if we compare 2 year on year, Black Friday and Cyber Monday in 2021 grew by 48% versus 2019. And all that is up to my favorite regurgitated e-commerce quote, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, which is basically COVID-19 accelerated Australian e-commerce 5 years ahead of schedule. And what I mean by that is approximately 16 to 18% of all sales in Australia are actually coming from e-commerce. That's a figure we did not expect to happen until 2025. However, obtaining traffic is becoming more of a challenge. We can no longer rely on lockdown-driven growth and COVID-driven growth, and it's unsurprising when you look at year-on-year figures that we're often comparing lockdown with non-lockdown. We can actually see, despite that growth in Black Friday and Cyber Monday sales in November 2021, the top 100 retail sites in Australia saw a traffic decline over year on year. However, what we are also seeing is an increase in engagement metrics. So that tells us there's a much more primed and engaged user participating online. And essentially what that wraps up to is we can no longer rely on that traffic growth. We have to better present our products online to capture that engaged user. Lastly, some observations we're seeing from a global perspective. So we're seeing a lot of global brand volatility. An example would be Nike pulling out of Foot Locker recently, who approximately are 70% of all their sales in 2021. Because of that e-commerce boom, we see a lot of brands pivoting towards direct-to-consumer, and we do expect to see that translate locally over the year. Even with that strength of brand presence and recognition, we do see that consumers are still deferring to retailers, where that could be due to price or impartiality. And the last thing to be mindful of is the growth of marketplaces. So back in 2019, in terms of overall Australian e-commerce, marketplaces accounted for about 20% of all sales online. We saw that grow significantly up to 32% in 2020, and we expect that to continue into 2022. I'm now going to pass you over to Mo, who's going to talk to us about the keys to success.
Thank you, Gab. As Gab mentioned, we're going to start with the 4 areas where we believe are key to success in setting up your e-commerce to have and increase your online sales over a shorter period of time. I'm going to start with team structure and the ways of working between the different functions within your business, as well as your partner agency and retail partners. Then we will look at what data points are available to you to be able to create a data-driven, cohesive e-com strategy so that everyone is aligned and working towards that e-com growth as a goal. Then the other areas that we want to focus on are how to use your own assets, digital assets in terms of product content and optimizing the best-in-class digital shelf. And finally, where available, how retail media can be used as a really important instrument to accelerate growth in sales. Starting with team structure, the reason why we believe it's an important matter is because with the evolving focus on e-com, that's essentially left a lot of businesses scrambling on how to get set up, who needs to have what function, and how the teams need to be working together. And this was accelerated by having a limited talent pool over the last couple of years with the closures in our borders, which has again led to some of our sort of e-com brands or more traditional brands to look at pivoting the roles that already exist within those functions to focus on e-com. On the other end, we see retailers rapidly focusing on monetizing their website and coming up with more and more ways for suppliers and brands to interact with them and run campaigns to improve their acquisition. And an important question here is that who within your business should be managing those conversations, or who should be informed in that area. And finally, as Gab mentioned, the Nike example, there's always the temptation to go direct to consumer for some brands, and because of the attractiveness of margins, control over customer experience, so on and so forth. But obviously there are balances to be met here with the investment in the infrastructure, so there could be avenues where you can maximize on all of those channels together. So just to materialize this, we're going to run through 4 typical team structures that might exist within your business at the moment. You can think of this as kind of a maturity model going from 1 to 4. So you know, the brands that might be early on in their e-com journey have traditionally had the sales and marketing functions, and as you can see here, the marketing team works more closely with the agency partners, and the sales team with the retail partners. That's historically been how the relationships were set up. But as e-commerce grows more and more, some brands set up their e-com function within the sales team. These are typically brands where retail is their biggest channel, or only e-com channel. So historically, given the relationships have always sat with the sales team, it does make sense for the e-com function to sit within that area of your business. Now, another way to look at this is if you've got multiple channels, especially if D2C comes into play here, then the marketing team and the activities that they do could influence e-com activities a lot more. And the other benefit of this structure is that the expertise or skill set needed within the eComm is usually a lot more aligned with digital marketing rather than your traditional sales and retail relationships. So we see this as a scenario or a team structure that works best to get the acceleration in eComm sales quicker. And finally, for more eComm mature brands, or brands where you might have all three channels of marketplace, direct-to-consumer, and retail equally working together, we see the eComm function be set up as a separate function and work closely with both marketing and sales, and from an implementation or activation point of view, work directly with the agency partners and the retailers where eComm is concerned. So what we'd love to hear from you is to go to the poll section of the platform and let us know which one of these scenarios that we just went through resonates with you or essentially mirrors your current structure. And we'll come back to that in a second. So I'll give you a few seconds to look at that. And just to bring all of this to life, this is an example of a recent project that we ran with a client in terms of the scenarios that we just went through. This client is more at the earlier stages of capitalizing on eComm, and retail is really their only main channel. So we created this RACI table to make sure that we align and help our client understand what teams are responsible for what activities specifically, so there are no confusions. This improves efficiency and, of course, reduces the chances of any issues when it comes to product launches or important eComm events. As Gav mentioned, some of those are really make or break for the calendar year, so really important in that area. Georgie, do we have a read on the poll?
We do. The numbers are still going up, but we're seeing around 40% leaning toward B, so e-commerce function as part of the sales team collaborating with marketing.
Perfect. It does make sense to me. As I mentioned, this is your gradual movement from that very traditional scenario one. It's great to see that you've established the eComm function. I see this as an important element, and we expected most of the audience to have retail as their core eComm channel, so it makes perfect sense. Thanks for your input, everyone. All right, so moving to the first key to success, the second key to success, which was a data-driven strategy. So we talked about or working with our clients when it comes to eComm by usually introducing TransAct, which is our eComm philosophy, our end-to-end strategy, from strategy to implementation framework that helps our clients grow their eComm sales. And we've taken a customer-centric approach to this to ensure that wherever we're sort of making recommendations or optimizations, it is always with the customer's best experience in mind, and ensuring that we touch and deliver the best experience at any important moment within the shopper's journey. And as you can see, the overall channels or activities that we've set up mimics a high-level user journey that goes beyond the acquisition phase and does focus on post-purchase experience in the get loved phase, because ratings and reviews are always important. I've briefly touched on the channels, eComm channels. By eComm channels, this is what we mean. So you might have a direct-to-consumer facing, usually your own website or your own assets in that sense, marketplaces like Amazon and eBay, and of course e-retail, being Kohl's, Woolworths, Dan Murphy's, or BWS, or many other great retailers we have in Australia. Now, having talked about all of this and of course the team structure, what I'm hoping to get across here is that depending on the number of channels that are available to you, the ecosystem within eComm could be complex and multidisciplined. The workings between digital marketing and within that paid and organic expertise is quite sort of varied. And when it comes to e-retail, because of that movement from retailers to monetize their assets, there might be individual or different teams within retailers that you would need to talk to. Examples of that could be cartology, for example, where there are elements that are available to you as fully managed, some areas that might be available to you as self-service. So understanding what's available from each retailer and being able to navigate that is sometimes key to sort of having the right strategy. Cool. Another poll for you. Again, understanding in terms of the channels that you focus on. I take it from the previous response, it might be closer to B, but it would be interesting to see what comes back from the audience. We'll, again, come back to this later. All right, so we've talked about a data-driven strategy. But the main question is, what are the data points that are available to us to create that cohesive strategy? The very first one is traffic data, your visibility on digital shelf. So when we look at this area, there is sort of clickstream data that's available to you. And of course, if you run any self-serve retail media campaigns, then all the performance metrics are available to you, from clicks all the way to conversions and sales. Of course, using your relationship with your retail partners, you could be getting access to the sales data available from them, and hopefully that data is broken down into online versus offline and even down to SKU level to help you make decisions based on your focus on different SKUs and what you've got in market in terms of campaigns. Then the share of digital shelf. So how visible are you against other players in your category, and what instruments are available to you to improve that from both organic and paid point of view? And of course, competitor intelligence. We don't exist in a vacuum. Sort of most competitors are going for the same goal of increasing their online share and sort of share of digital shelf. So making sure that we always have an eye on that in terms of sort of the data sources that are available. And finally, to really be able to make those decisions and pivot and do the right optimizations during your campaigns, you do want to have a eComm dashboard that combines your different channels, or at least adjacent channels, so different retailers together between organic and paid, and share of shelf, to be able to see how well you're doing on one retailer versus others. What is the ROI that you're getting out of each of your activity? These are examples of some of those data points that are available to us. So the share of shelf chart that you see there is from our proprietary tool, Flightdeck. We've got more than 30 Aussie retailers set up on that, and can track visibility at SKU level, category level, so on and so forth, and compare that with the competition. Then the clickstream data that I mentioned helps you understand essentially your brand traffic and compare that across multiple retailers. You might be doing really well on one and not necessarily the other. And that isn't necessarily always dictated by the market share of that retailer. So there are some key opportunities that you can uncover using that data. And of course, you do want to have that competitor intelligence, so understanding how well your brands, SKUs, or categories are doing on each retailer versus your competition. And finally, retail media, as I mentioned, platforms like Citrus Ad or Criteo allow you to run retail media campaigns managed by yourself, your retail partner, or your agency partner. Cool. So when it comes to the strategy, taking all of that data on board, aligning your brand strategy. Essentially, you might have new product launches, so your approach to that might be slightly different to when you need to increase sales volume versus when you want to push a promotion, for example. And then, as Gav mentioned, understanding those key eComm events and trying to align those with your core marketing campaigns outside of just even the digital channel, to accelerate sort of further your brand recognition as well as your sales when it comes to those key events. The other thing that I've touched on is based on the share of shelf help. How do you then manage the interplay between your organic and paid activity? You could maximize on sales by boosting both, or sometimes you might want to reallocate budget in areas where your organic visibility is really well, and channel that budget into another another retailer or category. So the third point was value of organic optimization, and the key here is to understand by focusing on your own assets, product content, and Gav will go in depth into this area. You will get a high ROI over time, but it is an investment that takes a bit of time to pay off, and it does require close relationship and collaboration between your agency partner, your e-retail partner, as well as the product and brand teams within your own business. And it is an ever-evolving space in terms of skill set and how each retailer has its own nuances on how your products are ranked for a certain search term. So keeping up with all of that is a key one to be able to succeed in this area. And finally, when it comes to retail media, this is an example of a strategy matrix that we've created for a certain client. We work with them to understand their core objectives, try to categorize those, and then really come up with primary or critical factors and secondary boosters, as we call them, when it comes to product selection and the activity that they would go for. So you might want to go for high margin, so you focus on your premium products that aren't on promotion, and how do you then manage that with your sales volume, where you might give up some of the margin and go for promotions to get the volume up. So some of the scenarios that play within this space. Cool. So before we jump in, do we have a view on the second poll?
We do. So it was actually quite a close call. We had e-retail at 41% and hot on the heels direct-to-consumer at 38%.
Well, the beauty of that is the resolution through TransAct offer all of those services,
There's
so
that
we can
sales
always
edge.
we can always help you build that out. But this is pretty common for what we see across the board. I would expect if we did this same poll in a year's time, that marketplace will have probably grown based on what Mo and I are seeing in the market and with our clients as well. So, interesting stats.
Definitely, and it goes back to that temptation to launch direct to consumer that you referred to early on, Gav, right?
Yep.
So yeah.
Fabulous. So as Mo mentioned, I'm going to jump into best-in-class shelf optimization. And what we'll look at is a few examples. One of the most common kind of technology and platforms that we see brands utilizing is SKU Vantage. Basically a third-party site to house all of your product information. And a lot of that gets pulled through to some of the core retailers in Australia. So there are a lot of best practices, but I'm not going to go through these in excruciating detail. What I really want to bring your attention to, and what I always encourage my clients to do, is think about how to visually merchandise your products online. A lot goes into visually merchandising products in store, but I think people don't put enough of a focus as to how your products are presented online, and by doing so, you will see significant impact to your e-commerce growth. I'm going to go through some specific examples as to how even the smallest of details can have a significant impact to your performance. So what we have here is an example that Mo and I came across probably a year or two ago on Dan Murphy's. So Asahi, I'm sure as we all know, is always marketed as Japan's #1 beer. If you actually searched for Japanese beer on Dan Murphy's at the time, Asahi did not show up in the search results. And the reason behind that, as you can see what we've pulled out there, is the country of origin was listed as China. So these minute details that you might think are inconsequential have a significant impact on how your products end up selling online. So we always like to kind of encourage people to have a bit of an organic and SEO lens across optimizing your products. So make sure that you're targeting the keywords that your consumers are actually searching online. This is another example, and the premise here is really to focus on have a mobile first mindset. Typically across any category in e-commerce, I see most websites, mobile accounts for about 60 to 70% of all traffic. Most touched on retail media, and we've also talked about organic optimization. So what this video will do is show, this was for Schweppes actually, for a search for tonic water, and it was to demonstrate to them how far a user actually had to scroll to get to their products. And I'm sure we're all the same, we're very impatient, we don't scroll very far. So from our perspective, if you're not present, you're not visible high up on the page, the likelihood of you getting that conversions are very small. So we can see in Dan Murphy's here, sponsored at the top there, 4 slots I believe it is, and then we get into organic. And this is really just showing you how long it takes to get to Schweppes, which we got to there. So it's really important to gain a really clear understanding of what paid slots exist on your retail partners, but also mobile-first mindset, like I mentioned. Touched on SKU Vantage, and there's some really engaging features that you can take advantage of at the moment. One of those being rich content. So this is something that if you are a brand that sells on Chemist Warehouse is available to you right now, and we have done this for clients. I will point out that none of the examples that we have in this presentation are client specific. Obviously, we keep that information anonymous, but we have other examples of what that content can look like. So if you think back to the start of the presentation, and I talked about how traffic is plateauing or seeing some slight year-on-year decline, but engagement metrics are up, you can see how content like this could be absolutely crucial in ensuring that we're actually capturing that engaged consumer. To do so and to demonstrate this, this is an example of what I would deem to be a poor product page. So lacking depth of content, it really doesn't showcase the features and benefits of the product well, and it's not engaging. I'll reference engagement metrics a lot. But what we can do, and we have done, and I'll go through some results of that with our clients, is help identify what is the different real estate and different options that they have on a product page available on your retailer, and get a clear idea as to how to better merchandise your products. And off the back of that, we create these bespoke wireframes based on each individual retailer, and then come up with, piece together the page with the rich content that we have available. And this is an example of what that could look like. Again, not a client example, but another example of what exists on Chemist Warehouse live right now. So you can see, if you think about the previous example, how much more engaging this is as a product page, and how much more likely this would be to capture that conversion versus the previous example. I mentioned we've actually actioned this for one of our clients. Launched the rich content on Chemist Warehouse, leveraging a mix of global and local assets. And this really goes back to team structure again. So working with sales and marketing and understanding what assets you have available to you. Mo also mentioned timing and aligning with brand strategies and calendars. We launched this in time for product-related seasonality. So at what time will certain products be in higher demand? And the results really speak for themselves. If we talk about engagement, we see average time on page increased by over 50%, bounce rate reduced by almost 70%, which is a significant result. And our overall share of search also increased by over 50%. So this, to us, really gives that tangible feel for how impactful improving the richness of your content can be. I'm going to use the word nuance a lot, so bear with me, I like the word. But understanding nuances across different retailers. I promise I haven't used Officeworks and Harvey Norman because I worked for both of those companies, but I do understand how their on-site search works off the back of it. There are a lot of unique factors, but there are a lot of consistent ones across retailers too, and some of those include keyword targeting and product naming conventions. Mo mentioned how powerful and impactful ratings and reviews are, both the quality and the quantity of it. Even the quality of your imagery, the richness of your content, but also consider the default ordering of each retailer. That's not always the same, but it is always important to make sure that you are targeting the most important keywords, particularly in your product naming conventions, because it does have a strong impact on how you perform for on-site search. And the reason why we focus on on-site search significantly tends to be the conversion rates for those consumers is significantly higher than a user who navigates through a retail website. But what's interesting in this observation here is if you can see some of those products that have shown up for the search of inkjet printer, actually the second one doesn't even contain the word inkjet in the product naming convention. So it's always useful to be mindful of what other things retailers might be doing. I know from my actual experience at Officeworks and working with the on-site search is the retailer might be seeking to push high margin products. And in the next example, it could even be a case, this is Harvey Norman, it could be a case of pushing clearance products to try and get rid of stock. So there are always going to be slight things that are out with our control, but from basically our experience working with clients and pulling on those key levers that it would refer to, we do see an impact off the back of this work. I do want to make some call-outs. Coles and Woolworths, of course, two of the biggest retailers in Australia. And this is really touching on SKU Vantage and talking back to those team structures that Mo referred to. So whilst a lot of information comes through from SKU Vantage and gets pulled through on a weekly basis to Coles and Woolworths, there are certain elements of how your product is merchandised online that are not pulled through. So the two examples we have on the right, for both Coles and Woolworths, they actually aren't pulling through product naming conventions. So in order to make that change, if you've identified that you're not best showcasing your product through the naming convention, you actually need to have a direct conversation with the retailer and with your brand manager that side. So I've pulled out an example here, which is Tenna on Coles supermarkets. The product is showing up as Tenna Lady. I don't know if everyone's aware, but this is a really dated connotation of that brand and not something that in this modern day they would really want to be associated with as a modern brand. So in order for them to address that with Coles, they would have to identify somebody internally and identify who is their contact at Coles to then update that information. And I will pass back to Mo, who's going to take us through retail media.
Cool. Thank you, Gav. So we've talked about the importance of retail media, and in most cases in Australia, we should note that not all retailers actually have this facility available to you, and the way for the ones that this is available, it is implemented is slightly different. So as I mentioned, sometimes you have access to self-managed campaigns and platforms, versus others where it's a managed service. So you work with your retail partner, brief them on a certain campaign, and the campaign is run on your brand's behalf. So again, staying with the Coles and Woolworths example as the previous section, and coming back to those nuances that Gav mentioned. So what we're seeing here is the difference between the implementation of retail media and serving of the ads between Coles and Woolworths. So starting with Coles, on a desktop view, everything that's highlighted above the fold is driven by retail media, in this case, citrus ads. So what that shows us is that if there is competition in this space, in your vertical, then even if you've done your organic optimization to the best and you hold the top organic position, your products might not necessarily be that visible, at least without scrolling down, and definitely, as we saw with that mobile first example, on mobile. Now, on Woolworths, the implementation is slightly different. It's more balanced, I would say, where you have one organic result and one sponsored result in this case. So these nuances can make a massive difference. If you imagine you're a pasta brand in this case, not having a campaign live on Coles could actually cost you sales, whereas on Woolworths, you could be more strategic. So this is one of those areas that you could sort of use the savings if the organic visibility is high on Woolworths and channel that onto Coles to make sure that you're actually competing with the brands that have their campaigns live. So I've touched on citrus ad as an example. There are different types of ad units depending on the implementation from the retailer that is going to be available to you, from display all the way to sponsored product. But the most common ad unit is sponsored products, where you can set up campaigns and target users based on their keyword searches, as well as the categories that are set up by the retailer. But one of the great things about running a campaign in this area and running it yourself or through your sort of agency partner is the wealth of data that you get back. And given that these campaigns can go live fairly quickly and fully in your control, you'll be able to optimize along the way depending on the results that you're seeing. So if you're seeing a surprisingly high ROI skew, then you could sort of navigate your budget allocation in that sense as well and maximize on that if this is your objective. Again, coming back to that matrix that we went through, I'll pick another sort of objective where we're looking at product launches, so increased awareness and sales. And in this case, naturally, when it's a brand new product, it's just gone live on your retail partner's website, probably could be not fully optimized, and if it is, then you might not have the sales history for it to rank really high. And you probably won't have a promotion or a discount on it. So all of these can impact your organic visibility. This could be an area where running a retail media campaign And even paying a premium in terms of the budget allocation or cost per clicks could help you get that reach and awareness in the market for your new product that you've just launched. And finally, there is another sort of avenue available to you, again, on select retailers, but this is available via Facebook. So this allows Facebook collaborative ads allow retailers to share your brand's sort of SKU listing from within their Facebook catalog and allow you to run marketing campaigns on Facebook and Instagram against those SKUs. So give you a lot of control, allow you to reach your own audiences and overlay that with the rest of your social commerce activity or just social activities, and capitalize on the audience that's available on Facebook. And you don't necessarily need to always rely on your retail partner to run the campaign in the exact way that you might like it, and of course have the benefit of being able to optimize and pivot along the campaign's length. So you could even run always-on campaigns on here. And of course, similar to Citrus Ad, you will get a wealth of information back from your own audience, and you do get the sales data back as well. You know, one of the wish lists that we, Gavin and Georgie have is for more retailers to adopt this, because it gives a lot more to brands to really increase their social commerce presence and share of search. Okay, that was me for now, and yeah, to the last section. Yeah.
Thanks, Mo. So of course, all of these processes and methodologies and theories are nothing without results, so we wanted to take you through something very tangible. We're going to show, Mo mentioned a lot about being data-driven and all the data points available to you. And over the next few slides, I've got basically some of the key things that we can look at to demonstrate the success and the ROI of the work that we do with our clients. So what we have in this example is a category using a tool platform, basically to look at a snapshot of what the perfect store looks like. And then you can see in some of those columns that it's addressed a lot of the areas that we've talked about: share of search, title accuracy, image accuracy, ratings and reviews. Gives them a score. It's always important at the basis of any of this work to come up with a benchmark that we can report back on and show that tangible impact. And then once we've implemented our work, revisit that and look at the scores now. And I'm not going to go through the numbers in excruciating detail. All you need to see is that there was a lot of reds and now there's a lot of greens. But essentially, yeah, this is one of the key metrics and data points that we always seek to look at when we're optimizing our clients' products online. Other things, of course, market share. Mo mentioned competitive intelligence. It's definitely key to understand where you're at before and where you're at after. And we've got several examples across many different categories. And just so you're aware, this is for a pharmaceutical client of ours. And this was across multiple retailers. So it included Chemist Warehouse, like the example I took you through previously, but also Coles and Woolworths. So off the back of the work that we undertook, we saw in one of our key brands in those categories develop a really high share of search, but we're also looking at bricks and mortar market share as well. So Mo mentioned it's important to have that online and offline view as well to give you that full picture. One of the products and categories, we got that high share of search, but still basic content, so it tells us there's a lot of room for improvement, and given the success we've seen off the back of rolling out rich content, we expect that if we were to do so, it would build out that market share. And lastly, by no means least, is the ideal scenario. We're dominating share of search, we're getting engagement through rich content, and we're having that holistic view of organic and retail media. So they're balanced out to get greater efficiencies in spend, but ultimately the optimal sales revenue as well. And by no means last but least, we have the impact. So this is looking at share of search. And we want to show how this is typically actioned. It's not all going to be done overnight. We have that research and benchmarking, like the digital store snapshot we referred to. We have that team structure alignment, and it's worth calling out for the specific client. We actually helped them establish an e-commerce P&L. So we can basically pivot to whatever our clients' needs are, whether it's just doing something like the RACI matrix that Mo took you through, or helping establish a P&L. Then looking at that really granular targeted SKU optimization at an organic level. In this instance, it was working with SKU Vantage and making sure that we're merchandising the products as best as they can be and we're keyword targeting appropriately. Then once we've established that strong organic presence, we're in a much better position to understand where best to spend our retail media budget. Mo mentioned it's an ever-evolving space. It would be remiss of us not to revisit our work and track performance. And off the back of that, we make some further tweaks to try and continue that growth in sales. And these are the results that we saw. The SKUs that we targeted were 3 times more visible in organic search across those key retailers I mentioned. 146% increase in sales across those target SKUs. And I might get the name of this presentation wrong, but we talked about how to double your online e-commerce sales within 9 months with the right tools and technology. Just over doubled, 106% revenue increase. This is actually across 8 months of this graph, so we should have renamed it, but you know, we want to be realistic. But yes, basically this ties it all together. You can see how there's multiple data points that we want to look at and to demonstrate the value of our work. And we do think the processes that we've established can be actioned across any category and have similar impact. And that is us, and we're going to jump to Georgie.
Fantastic, thanks guys. So we'll head over to the questions. We've got quite a few lined up. So first up, we've got a question from Anton, who would like to know, how do you account or attribute for mid-funnel marketing activity that's not linked to a sale? And I'm going to come to you, Mo, for that one.
Sure. Great question, first of all. But without knowing what specific mid-funnel activity we're talking about here, I would go back to one of those data points that was available to us, and that is traffic. So traffic is usually that leading indicator towards conversion further down the funnel or consumer journey. And as you sort of do your optimization or run your campaigns, if you've got access to traffic to those SKUs or categories that you're focusing on, seeing a growth in traffic will essentially result into higher sales down the line as well. So hopefully that's aligned with what Anton had in mind in terms of question.
Fantastic, thank you. Okay, next up we've got a question from Daryl, who would like to know, what are Resolution's social commerce capabilities? Gav, maybe you can take this one.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a passion point of mine, which is social commerce. I think it's a rapidly evolving space that's really exciting. And we're seeing it across the board. We have very close kind of engagement and relationships with Facebook, TikTok, Snapchat, Pinterest, Instagram. And I think one of the first advancements was Facebook and Instagram's announcement of shops, which is still evolving, and we don't have the commerce functionality within Australia yet, but it's something that we expect to come. But from my perspective, it's just about being present at all potential touch points. I think Mo mentioned that earlier. So we are doing exciting things with the likes of Pinterest. They're massively scaling up their e-commerce capabilities. And the same goes for TikTok as well. We're seeing a lot of integrations as to how to convert your consumer wherever they are shopping online. So it's definitely something that we're really keen to make sure is a core part of TransAct.
Great, thank you. Next up, we've got a question from Sally. How do you see retail media in Australia evolving over the next year? Mo, we'll come to you.
Great question again. So of course, there's a lot that is happening in the market in the same way that we've seen a lot happen over the last 24 months or even more recently. But I would think that there will be more and more retailers who would look to monetize their assets, as we touched on earlier on. So as a brand, look out and sort of talk to your retail partners to understand what opportunities are available to you. To start with, everything might be managed service or something like that, but the more and more we see self-serve platforms coming on board, you as a brand will have more control over the activities that you run there, so it's perfect. Then if I'm talking to sort of like retailers, I would hope that there are more, there's more data being shared back with the brands through the reporting mechanism that exists or not. Better attribution, especially between online and offline, given the market share of still the sort of traditional retail in Australia, I would see that as a hugely valuable data point, and I know quite a few of the core retailers are working on addressing that issue. And finally, making the briefing process easier for brands. At the moment, there is a lot of, I believe, resource-intensive steps between launching a campaign with a retailer that could be resolved along the way, and that better ways of working being set up. So all of these coming together, I think, will only lead to a growth in retail media spend from brands, and the more visibility across the data they have, the better decisions they can make.
Fantastic. And next up, we've got a question from Joshua, who would like to know, what have the biggest changes been to e-commerce since COVID began? You're the COVID analyzer. Let's hear from you.
Yeah, where to start? There's a lot, and I'm sure a lot that people are aware of supply chain issues. There's been some great initiatives though as well. I think a lot of retailers and brands pivoted to contactless click and collect, curbside click and collect, whatever you want to call it. Which has been great, and I think there's an increased demand for that and an expectation that that will continue. But I talked about supply chain issues. We've also seen a significant number of supply chain operators come in, both locally and globally, which has addressed some of those issues. But yeah, I think that contactless piece is definitely a really key one. I myself have used it. I think Bunnings do a great job of it. And I think that's going to continue options like that, just making it a more seamless transaction.
And then we've got one from the live chat. So Stelios would like to know, and this is a two-part one, seeing a lot of retail media mentions in the trade press, are we seeing more investment shift there, and how much data is available from retail vendors? And what's your POV on impact moving forward? Maybe you can both have a go at that one.
Okay, should I take the first part?
Sure, go for it.
I'll take the first part. Yes, we are seeing increases in spend across almost all of our clients. We've had new clients coming on board and launching campaigns, even in the last sort of few months. And of course, the impact of core shopping events, the change from Boxing Day and Christmas and all of those moving forward to Black Friday, Cyber Monday, has contributed to all the increase in the spend.
What was the second part of that question from the lovely Stelios?
What's your POV?
What's my POV? I think going back to the most previous question, which was about data, we're going to need to see more and more of that. But I think as well, what I've seen with retail media across the past 2 years, there was very little adoption of it initially. And because of that, things like CPCs were very attractive compared to, let's say, Google. And that is becoming a lot more competitive, the more brands that are getting into that space. So I think we'll start to see some advancements because of that. It can no longer rely on a competitive CPC.
Great. And I guess last one is from me. What are your big bets over the next 3 years?
Oh, okay. You looked at me there.
Well, 3 years is a long time, and I think the last 24 months have definitely proved that. I think there's a huge growth coming in social commerce. I think the value of the fragmentation in the market will continue, so there will be new players coming in, but you can expect some of those new players to become big e-com players in a shorter period of time. The expectation of the convenience, especially this is more of a local observation, that's completely changed in Australia. So, having a great e-com experience is now an expectation rather than something that only sort of the top brands can boast about. So, keeping that in mind, the customer-centric approach will make a huge difference. The last thing is obviously, from my point of view, the change in privacy and cookieless future, which will certainly increase the importance of direct relationship with your customers. So loyalty programs is just an example where we're seeing huge evolvements and really fast evolvements across this space. So watch out for those.
Awesome. Gav, over to you.
The one that came to mind is things like live stream shopping. And I think the other one, if anyone read my article on B&T a while back, is that greater integration between online and offline. So we're seeing a lot of examples where, you know, if you're shopping online, you can actually engage with an in-store team member who can guide you through products. So maintaining a consistent kind of brand or retailer experience, whether it's online or offline, and blurring the lines essentially. We talk about kind of seamless or frictionless commerce.
Yeah.
And I think that's really what we're going to see a lot of focus on moving forward.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. You know, that's the core focus for a lot of the big tech partners that we have, like Salesforces of the world, so on and so forth. So.
Beautiful. Thank you, guys. That was
Sure.
great. I know I definitely learnt a lot, so hopefully the audience did. That rounds things off for today. We said we'd get you back on the top of the hour, back to work, so you've got just enough time to make a cup of tea. Hopefully you all got some value to take back to your businesses, and it's really got you kind of thinking about what to do in the commerce space. Thank you all very much for tuning in. And if there are any other questions or you didn't get a chance to ask a question, please reach out to us. We'll also share the link to the landing page, and we'll also share the instructions to review the webinar afterwards as well. So thanks again, Mo and Gav, and we'll see you all soon.
Thanks, Georgie.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.